The Just Lead Advancing Racial Equity Conference, hosted by New Detroit, brought together national and local speakers who provided compelling insights into racial equity and justice. Kari Frazier, Detroit is Different, provides you conversations with some of the phenomenal guests, talking dismantling racism with collaborative solutions.
My name is Dr. David Campt. I'm with the Dialogue Company. My direct focus is on how people should talk to the 50% of white folks who don't think racism is real.
Detroit is Different podcast here at the Just Lead Conference from New Detroit. And I'm with David Campt of the Dialogue. What's going on, sir? How are you?
What's happening, bro? How you doing?
All is well, all is well. And we definitely saw your engagement throughout the conference. What do you think, walking away from day one, stood out to you most about substantive items to add to this racial equity discussion for Metro Detroit?
I think that the way the conference ran is it shows the complexity of the problem. We need people thinking about what are incentives that institutions have to get people engaged and to move them forward. That incentive, the institutional incentive question is really important. We need people to do better at combating the resistance and the hesitation. We need people talking to each other better. My particular focus is on how the conversations happen, how the conversations between people who think that racism is real, which is about 80% of people of color and 50% of white people. We need to figure out how to do better as we engage the 50% of white people who don't think that racism is real. Yeah, the 20% of black people of color who don't is fine, but they're less important than the 50% of white people who think racism is not real. So my particular focus is on that question of how do we have those conversations using best practices as opposed to the worst practices we often use. So the conference to me conveyed how, as important as what I do is, there's bigger issues, because people talked about institutional inertia and how it's hard to move institutions even when people want to move. They talked about the need for different incentives. They talked about the need for us to get more people, especially non-black people, at conferences like this. So it reinforces the multifaceted nature of the situation, which is good because it's a complex problem that's 400 years in the making, and it's not surprising that we're not going to solve it quickly.
So of it, we also had Nikole Hannah-Jones,
awesome,
from the 1619 Project, as a keynote speaker today in a facilitated discussion. What stood out there and in the information she provided? How do you feel that melds and blends into this story of racial equity for Metro Detroit?
I think that she reinforced the fact that we're in a national struggle over our collective narrative about the country. And her whole project, which she reinforced today, is about the impediments to coming up with, in her mind, a true narrative. I'm not saying that that's not true. You could also say, what's a common narrative? A common narrative needs to, of course, include all the truths. So what she reinforced so poignantly was the fact that there's aspects of our history which we just are either not aware of or in denial about. We've bought into the way that certain forces have prevented us, even who are advocates for a new narrative, from knowing certain things that are important for our own self-concept, as well as how we talk about this narrative to other people. So, as you may recall, she asked, what did Thomas Jefferson do? How did he make his money? How did George Washington make his money? Excuse me. And I hollered up architect and farmer, and she is, of course, correct that even those ways of making his money were significantly about slavery. And I don't normally think about it like that. And it just goes to show, so that's number one. And number two, I did not know what she said about George Washington talking about the British want to do to us what we're doing to the slaves. Like, I certainly knew that there was controversy around slavery among the founding fathers, but that's really pithy. That's really a poignant way of framing up the thinking at the time. And so it's difficult for us to transition our minds to how people were thinking a long time ago, but it's important we do that, because if we're going to hold ourselves morally responsible and be humble about where we think the line is now, we need to have some level of responsibility we hold to people in the past who we don't just give them a pass because the prevailing ideas were something, when those were prevailing ideas, but there were other ideas at the time, that slavery was wrong, that what they were doing was immoral. And so part of the poignancy that I got from her is that we need to take seriously, we need to hold them morally accountable with some amount of grace that we also want. We also want some amount of grace from each other and from future generations for whatever are the moral crimes we're committing now. We need to. It's a balance where we can't hold people to our current standards. We can't let ourselves off the hook or the past off the hook completely. And I thought that the way she brought that up was really helpful.